Hi everyone, I welcome you all to this lecture. Today I am going to discuss with you the story of Munshi Premchand, Panch Parmeshwar. You must have studied this story in your school days also. So we'll start. I have divided this lecture into different sections. The first section deals with the introduction part that includes the about the author. The second part we have got the concept note. The third part is the dominant idea, and the last part will be concluding it. So let's start with the introduction part. The introduction part can further be divided into two parts: the Sarpanch in the village Panchayat and the role of Jumman and Aglu. So let's start with the introduction part. You see, justice above self is translated from Hindi into English. It is originally known as Panch Parameshwar, which is written by Munshi Premchand. In English, the title is The Holy Panchayat. The story revolves around two best friends. The names are Jumman and Aglu. I repeat, the names are Jumman and Algu. You see, it deals with these roles as the Sarpanch in the village Panchayat and how one changes as soon as he or she is delivering justice. All of you should know Munshi Premchand was an Indian writer famous for his modern Hindustani literature. He is one of the most celebrated writers of the Indian subcontinent, and he is also regarded as one of the foremost Hindustani writers of the early 20th century. In addition to this, he began writing under the pen name Nawab Rai, but subsequently switched to Premchand, while, while he was also known as Munshi Premchand. You see, Munshi being an honorary prefix, a novel writer, story writer, and dramatist. He has been referred to as the Upanyas Samrat, that means the emperor among novelists, by some Hindi writers. If we talk about the work of Munshi Premchand, we can say that his works include more than a dozen novels, around 250 short stories, several essays and translations of a number of foreign literary works into Hindi. So this is all about the introduction part of it. In the next part, we'll be talking about the concept note. So now let's start the concept note. You see, in the story, Jumman and Algu were friends. I would rather say they were best friends actually. Jumman had an old aunt. She was in a dispute with him over the issue of the transfer of her property. The old lady took the argument to the village panchayat to end the daily fights. Jumman was pretty sure that he would win because of the very reason that everyone was obliged to him and would not dare to stand against him. But contrary to what he had expected, the panchayat stood in favor of his aunt, and surprisingly, it was Algu, Jumman's best friend, who took the decision. So this was the first incident. After this incident, Jumman considered Algu as his enemy and a treacherous fellow. He thought of him as a deceitful person. On the other hand, Algu did not feel guilty about his decision because he knew that The roots of a stable friendship lay in our abilities to do justice and be critical of our friend. Algu knew that there was sanctity about the punch. Whatever he spoke would be treated with the same respect as the words of God. Once a man takes the position of a punch, he cannot afford to be partial. As a judge, there are no relationships, family, familiar or friendly ties or biases, no subjective or emotional considerations. Justice should be objective and unprejudiced. If a man becomes a punch, God speaks through his lips. It is a position of great social and moral justice. The person who stands on such a pedestal understands it and can't resist it. This realization was seen in Jumman when he was given the chance of solving the dispute between Algu and Samju Sahu. Even though he wanted to take revenge on Algu for what he had done to him, but when he was chosen the punch, his conscience overpowered him. He realized that whatever he would utter through his lips would be the words of God, and falsehood would be swept away. Hence, he concluded his decision in favor of Algu, which was a just and morally correct decision. And that is when Jumman's notion of blind loyalty was also wiped away. As you can see, the dominant idea can be categorized at three levels. Number one, realism in society. Two, notion of human beings. And the last is role of the judge. You see, it is one of the excellent writings of Munshi Premchand, which shows us the right way to follow the principles of life, a difficult path of honesty and principles. It takes a lot of courage to stick with the fair and unbiased decision to be just, leaving relations behind and keeping justice above all. There are two main characters in this story named, as we have already discussed, Algu Chaudhary and Jumman Sheikh, who were best friends from childhood. They were together in each other's hard times. Friendship of both gets distorted when Algu was chosen to become the serpent, that means the justice, for the case of Jumman Sheikh and her Khala aunt. Jumman Sheikh thought that he would win the verdict because Algu is his best friend, but above all, Algu chooses the path of justice over friendship, and Algu gives an unbiased verdict against Jumman. Jumman was shocked with the verdict and vows to ruin the life of Algu. That is how best friends became foes in a single day, forgetting all sweet old memories, and this inseparable relation of friendships gets destroyed. Few years later, the story takes a shocking turn when Jumman Sheikh gets a great opportunity to take revenge from Algu Chaudhary, as Algu knocks the door of Panchayat to get justice against Samju Samju Sahu. Let's move on to the next part. Algu had been a fine pair of oxen which he bought. It was just a chance that one of the oxen died just after the month of Jumman's Panchayat, and single the ox became useless. Algu was in financial crisis and he decides to sell that ox. Samju Sahu purchases it, but he doesn't pay the complete amount to Algu and asks for some time to pay. By the time Algu gets his money, the ox dies because of the abuse of his capacity and overloading. Algu does not get any money for that ox after his death. Then comes the ball in the court of Jumman Sheikh when Samju elects Jumman to be the Sarpanch, where everyone, including Algu, was sure that Samju would win the case with due to any animosity in Jumman towards Algu. But the sense of responsibility towards the high office of Sarpanch becomes conscious in Jumman. He realizes that at this moment he was seated on the highest throne of justice. He also realized that whatever he speaks now would be considered as the words of God. Keeping all the ethics in mind, Jumman shows the justice above all, and once again, Algu and Jumman became friends. Let's start with the first part of it. The first part is realism in society. You see, Panch Parmeshwar has many aspects pointing towards the real socialism, or you can say realism in society. Munshi Premchand wrote many short stories reflecting social realities which greatly impacted the society. The greatest aspect which is rare to find is the Hindu-Muslim unity, not only in personal relation but also in dispensing justice. Dispensing fair justice has always been a sensitive issue in India, a land of diverse cultures. Since the advent of British in India, systemization of uniform civil code was always a challenge. Different religious laws and their strength to uphold the system often promotes decentralization of power. The Indian Panchayat is one of the finest examples of dispensing justice among those who are directly affected. You see, Panch Parmeshwar is the story of two childhood friends, Jumman Sheikh and Algu Chaudhary. When Algu Chaudhary became the I said Mukhia of Panch and dispensed fair verdict, which went against his best friend Jumman. Friends became foes. But in due course, when Jumman became the Sarpanch and sat on the judgment seat, his conscience could not overtook accountability and responsibility. Jumman realized the dignity of the position and decided to follow the path of justice. The one sitting on the judgment seat cannot be subjective, cannot be biased. An ideal judge is always objective and unbiased. You see, the truth upholds opposition and places relationship between two beings higher. The story of Panch Parmeshwar brings out beauty of human relationship beyond the narrow boundaries of religion as shown in the context of Zumman Sheikh and Algu Chaudhary. They placed truth and justice by a code of ethics accepted universally. See, moving on to the next part, notion of human beings. You see, Premchand depicted the sense of universal reality very beautifully in his short story Panch Parmeshwar. It has also focused on certain shades of personality. We can say that this story to decode the notion of human beings. There is always a brighter side to each individual. For example, Jumman Sheikh, though influenced in the glory of wealth accumulated by him through wrong means, did support the case of Algu because Algu's case was true. Even Algu did the same on the basis of the concept of justice. He did not support his old friend Jumman because Jumman's case was false. This depiction of Premchand makes us believe in the hidden virtue of truthfulness within every soul. The story portrays the materialistic vision outlook of the society, the blindfolded vision enfolded with greed makes a person unjust. Jumman Sheikh's aunt, who was thoroughly exploited by Jumman for her property, begged for justice, and nobody supported her. She was old, helpless, and childless. She believed in the Panch and therefore sought justice from the Sarpanch. Justice spreads its wings to ponder the glory of solace, as it does in the case of Jumman, Sheikh, and Khala. Now, the last point is role of the judge. As you know that Panch Parmeshwar is a work that goes beyond this one-dimensional reading. Let's take the concept of justice it explores and the purity of the seat of justice represented by the Panchayat, the original village-centric system of justice that caters to the needs of the illiterate and the poor in India. They do not have access to state-sanctioned legal machinery, as Khalajan, the old maternal aunt of Jumman Sheikh, states. I would like to tell you one more thing about this story. Actually, this system of justice depends on two concepts. First, justice is not revenge, it is for the greater social good, based on the principles of goodwill and fair play in a sense. Secondly, it presumes that the voice of Panchayat is the voice of God, and the Panch are invested with a spark of divine power. When they occupy this exalted seat of power, Premchand's story rises above the ordinary because it shows that it is the seat of justice that instills the spark of this divine power in human beings who are not perfect, who are otherwise capable of cruelty, insensitivity, and injustice in their everyday life. So, Jumman Sheikh, who is the Sarpanch in Algu Chaudhry's case, his friend, or you can say enemy, is capable of tremendous cruelty to Khalajan, divesting her of her right to a decent living. Being the, you know, I mean, similarly, Algu Chaudhry is not a paragon of virtue either. It is with great reluctance that he agrees to become the serpent in the Jumman Sheikh Kalajan case. And before the case comes up for hearing, he does not feel the need to use to use his goodwill with his friend to intercede on behalf of the old woman who has been deprived of her basic human necessities. The point that Premchand is making is that ordinary human beings can rise above their pettiness when they are invested with authority and responsibility. Panch Parameshwar is also about the exploitation of underdog, and women and the elderly became the most obvious representatives of it. It is about property relations. A woman can be persuaded to surrender her property and then is ill treated by the beneficiaries in a society which theoretically prescribes reverence to the elderly and in actual practice treats them as unproductive and unnecessary burdens. This is the delight, I mean, this is the, the central part of the story. You can say that this is the highlight of the story. The journal buys against women in this, in this patriarchy society is, or in its subtext. Jumman's wife, name is Kariman, has internalized this patriarchal ideology so completely that she joins forces with her husband against Kalajan. The three women in the story, Kariman, Algu's wife, and Samju Sahu's wife, are shrill and quarrelsome, and they need to be tamed by their husbands. There is just another telling sentence in the whole story, which points to this aspect, speaking volumes for the economy of expression and the sense of irony that is intrinsic to any Premchand story. When Kariman and Algu's wife get into a quarrel after the bullock that Algu had sold to Sahu dies, the husbands have to intervene, and Premchand says Algu, instead of explanation, use the logic of his stake. It will be difficult to find a more effective, precise, condensed, and understated portrayal of domestic violence in literature than this one single satiric sentence. In addition, we can also say that cruelty is the single key word that infuses this story. Cruelty of human world. Cruelty directed by human beings to all those who are weak and underprivileged, be they human or animals. The graphic account of the cruelty of Sahu to the bullock which he buys from Algu, which eventually kills the animal, could well be an illustration of what George Orwell depicts in his Animal Farm. Overwork, exploitation, starvation, physical violence. This is the lot of poor beasts, and it becomes a potent symbol for the exploitation in the human world too. So, what I'm trying to say is true. I mean, it is quite true that the story ends with a sentimental reconciliation between the two friends, with each of them having proved that they are capable of rising above their pettiness and self centered existence when invested with power and authority. This forms the basic humanism of Premchand's vision that human beings may cruel and exploited by nature. I mean, they can be uh, cruel and exploitative by nature, but their humanity resides in their ability to rise above their beastly nature. It is not that he would not be aware, or he's not aware of the corrupting and dehumanization nature of power. Again, as Orwell demonstrate, I mean, he demonstrates in his satiric novel, but his vision is wide enough to accommodate the a regenerative belief that power can make a flawed human being living in a hostile social system responsible and just. The leap of faith that is the crux of enduring literature. Now let's come to the conclusion part of this story. Dear students, as you know that Panch Parameshwar is not only a story, but a guide of human behavior towards society. Different traits of behavior like revenge, expectations, criticism, narrow-mindedness, etc., are substantially mentioned in such a way that while being reflected in the story, they do not seem to be human vices, but normal human psychology. Society has to move along with these vices of human beings. Justice, above all, wins these vices. As you know that somewhere in the story, Premchand has very successfully attached, divine power to the post of Punch. The awareness of our responsibility often alters our narrow outlook. When we lose our way, this awareness becomes our guide. So, in a word, I would like to say that when a person, sits or take the position of a, you know, punch, he cannot be biased. He or she has to be, you know, um, um, impersonal. And the words that come from punch are not the words of the any individual. These are the words of the, you know, um, God. So this is the end of this lecture. I'm sure the story is very simple in nature, and I'm sure that you already got the idea of how it is all about. But even if you have got any problem, you just go through the story available in your study material. And if you find any difficulty in understanding any part of the story, just write to me on my email ID. Thank you very much.